It was an incident that took place in a government official's residence in Sisaket province. At that time, Kayla and her husband were traveling to visit and stay overnight with her husband's friend, who lived in that government residence. There, she encountered such terrifying events that it made her believe in the existence of ghosts. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. The events trace back to around the year 2014. Kayla and her husband were government employees stationed in Amnat Cherowin province. They had moved and bought a house in the said province about 2 years prior. Her husband often had opportunities to perform official duties outside the area, leading him to have many acquaintances in various provinces. It was common for him to visit and socialize with friends from different provinces frequently. Since Kayla and her husband didn't have children yet, it made it easier for them to travel together. At that time, Kayla's husband invited her to visit a friend's house in Sisaket province. He explained that a group of friends, about 7 or 8 people, had planned to get together but lacked a skilled cook like Kayla, so he wanted her to help cook and stay overnight. Kayla did not refuse. On the day of the trip, around 3 in the afternoon, she and her husband drove towards Sisaket. By the time they reached their destination, it was already evening. The house was a government residence located quite deep within the village, almost at the very end. It was a 2-story wooden house that looked dilapidated, as if it hadn't been lived in for a long time. In front of the house was an old wooden platform situated near a large tree. The house was surrounded by several large trees, creating a gloomy atmosphere that made Kayla feel a strange shiver when she first saw it. After her husband introduced his friends to Kayla, Olga, a friend's girlfriend, showed Kayla the place to stay and where to store their belongings. Inside the house, past the front door, there was a set of wooden chairs for guests. To the right was a small hall with a waist-high cabinet partitioning the space. Olga led Kayla into the small hall, and as she walked, Kayla looked around. When she looked up at the ceiling, she was a bit surprised by how high it was for a government residence, making the space feel particularly open but simultaneously eerie. Combined with the evening atmosphere and the diminishing light outside, it gave Kayla an inexplicable chill. Olga opened a window to let light into the hall before Kayla walked over to the window. Looking out to the left, she saw a large tree and some men moving an old wooden platform near its base to place it in the front yard. Olga apologized to Kayla, saying, "Sorry for having to lay a quilt on the floor for you tonight. We've only just moved in for 2 nights, so things are still quite disorganized." Kayla didn't mind since she and her husband were easygoing people. After unpacking, the couple went to the back of the house to prepare food. When Kayla opened the back door, she was slightly shocked by what she saw. Due to the area behind the house being overgrown with tall grass, the first thought that flashed through Kayla's mind was snakes, as she was extremely afraid of them. However, she didn't say much, understanding that they had just moved in a few days ago. Kayla also noticed that the back of the house had an awning extending out like a canopy. The ground was uneven concrete with patches of cracks. Not far from the back door, there was an old charcoal stove beside a gas stove, along with a disorganized old stainless steel sink. Kayla and Olga spent some time cleaning the back kitchen. Suddenly, they heard a shout from the front of the house. They quickly ran to the source of the noise and saw Kayla's husband and his friends pointing towards the front fence. When Kayla looked in the direction they were pointing, she saw an old man sitting on an antique tricycle with a sunshade, like something out of a period movie. Olga shouted for the old man to bring the tricycle into the house. As the old man pushed the tricycle to the front of the house, Kayla noticed that it was loaded with bags of various vegetables, as well as pork, mushrooms, duck, chicken, and assorted drinks. Olga instructed the old man to bring the items into the kitchen. Seeing this, Kayla led the way to the kitchen to prepare containers for the meat and vegetables. The old man slowly carried the first load of items into the kitchen. When he encountered Kayla, he asked where to place the items. Kayla told him to leave them on the floor there. However, something that struck Kayla and aroused her curiosity was the old man's peculiar nervousness. He kept glancing left and right, as if he were afraid of something, which was quite noticeable. As the old man was bringing the last load into the kitchen, Kayla suddenly heard Olga shouting. Kayla rushed to see what had happened and saw blood splattered on the floor, with the old man standing there holding bags in both hands. As Kayla got closer, she saw that a bag of blood and a bag of offal had fallen and burst on the floor, causing blood to spill everywhere. The bag of blood was intended for making a dish called Sisaket, an Iceland dish similar to larb but with a significant amount of fresh pig or cow blood added. At that moment, the old man hurriedly placed the items in the kitchen, while Olga quickly went to the back of the house to find something to collect the scattered items on the floor. Suddenly, Kayla caught a strong scent of blood that hit her nose intensely. She then felt a cold sensation rapidly pass behind her, similar to the feeling of someone running past her. Out of the corner of her eye, she vaguely saw what seemed like someone standing and watching her from the staircase landing on the right side of the house. Kayla instinctively turned to look at that spot but saw no one standing there. Only the dim light coming through from the second floor cast a shadow on one of the house's columns, creating an illusion of someone standing and staring at her from the staircase landing. This sight gave Kayla an inexplicable chill. Soon after, Olga returned from the back of the house with a cooking pot, accompanied by the old man. The old man profusely apologized to Kayla and Olga for dropping the bag of blood on the floor, offering to help clean up the mess. Olga reassured him that it was okay and that they could handle it themselves. The old man bowed several times to apologize, and, as he did, Kayla noticed that he glanced at the staircase landing as if he was looking at someone. He then hurriedly excused himself and left the house. After spending a considerable amount of time cooking in the kitchen, Kayla's husband's friends began to arrive, one by one or in pairs. Some helped carry tables, chairs, and drinks to the front yard. Others assisted in setting up lights in the area where they would be socializing that night. As the evening grew darker, Olga turned on the lights inside the house. Each light emitted an orange glow, which was not very bright, further adding to the gloomy atmosphere. Around 7 p.m., all of her husband's friends had arrived. None of them brought their partners, leaving Kayla and Olga as the only women in the house. After serving the food to the men, Kayla and Olga sat nearby, at a small table close to the house, enjoying their meal and letting their husbands socialize freely. They kept an eye out to see if anything needed replenishing. The two chatted until around 8 p.m., when the temperature dropped significantly. Concerned that it would get even colder later, Kayla decided to take a shower since the house had no hot water. As Kayla was about to shower, she scooped water from the basin to wash her face and was struck by how cold it was, as if ice had been placed in it. While she continued to bathe, she suddenly heard a noise that sounded like someone moving chains upstairs. She paused to listen more closely. After a short while, the noise occurred again, this time sounding like chains being dragged across the wooden floor. This prompted Kayla to look up at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Feeling uneasy, Kayla decided to wrap herself in a towel and open the bathroom door. She walked slowly, her head tilted up, following the ceiling as she tried to locate where the noise was coming from upstairs. However, the sound abruptly stopped. Confused, Kayla called out, "Hello? Is anyone up there?" But was met with silence. Suddenly, a voice from behind startled her. "What are you doing standing here?" Kayla jumped and turned to see Olga walking from the front hall. "Oh my God, Olga, you scared me. Why do you have to sneak up like that?" Olga laughed slightly before saying, "Sorry about that, but why are you standing here all wet?" Kayla, still curious, asked if anyone was upstairs. Olga responded that there was no one and asked, "Why? Is there something wrong?" Kayla chose not to share what she had heard, thinking that it might upset them since they had just moved in. She then asked Olga to stay by the bathroom door while she finished her shower. Olga agreed and chatted with Kayla from outside the bathroom, asking why she thought someone was upstairs. Kayla brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. I just heard a gecko earlier and got scared." After finishing her shower, Kayla quickly dressed and came out of the bathroom. Olga then took her to prepare the sleeping area in the small front hall. Olga pulled out bedding from a nearby cabinet, and they worked together to lay out the mats and set up the sleeping area. Before heading off to her own shower, Olga promised to sleep next to Kayla, who admitted she was feeling uneasy in the unfamiliar house. She suggested that the men sleep together in the guest hall. Soon after, Olga finished her shower, and Kayla told her husband she was going to bed early. The group wished her good night and reassured her not to worry about her husband, promising to take care of him if he got too drunk. As soon as Kayla's head hit the pillow, she fell asleep immediately. She woke up in the middle of the night feeling cold and tried to pull the blanket over herself. When she opened her eyes, she realized the room was pitch dark except for a faint light filtering in through the windows. Kayla reached for the blanket at the foot of the bed and, as she did, she heard what sounded like people talking outside. The voices were slurred, as if the speakers were drunk. She thought to herself, "Are they still partying at this hour?" She turned to look at Olga, who was supposed to be sleeping beside her. However, Kayla almost screamed in shock when she saw that the person lying next to her was not Olga, but her husband. Confused, she wondered when he had come to lie there. Once she collected her thoughts, Kayla's curiosity got the better of her. She wondered who was still outside drinking. She quietly crawled to the foot of the bed, lifted the mosquito net, and headed towards the window. Kayla slowly opened the window just enough to peek outside and cautiously leaned in to get a closer look. When she looked out into the front yard, she saw a man sitting asleep in a chair. But when she scanned her eyes towards the big tree next to the yard, Kayla felt a chill run through her entire body. She saw Olga's husband sitting in a chair with his back leaning against the tree in front of the house. But what made her hair stand on end was seeing a mysterious woman with very long hair, so long it almost touched the ground. The woman was sitting on Olga's husband's shoulders. Then suddenly, the woman turned towards Kayla as if she knew Kayla was watching her. Seeing this, Kayla quickly ducked away from the window and scrambled back to the mosquito net. Just as she was about to open the net, her eyes caught something in the reception area. Upon closer inspection, she saw a dark figure sitting on one of the chairs. At that moment, she hurried back into the net and pulled the blanket over herself, staying like that all night because what she saw made it impossible for her to sleep. She didn't know what time it was when she woke up. She only knew she lay curled up under the blanket until morning. When her husband woke up, she immediately urged him to take her home. After returning home, Kayla didn't tell her husband about the incident because she thought it might have been her fear causing her to see strange things that night. But about a month later, Kayla's husband brought her some bad news. Their friend who stayed at that house had died in an accident. Kayla was shocked when she heard this. Just before the funeral, her husband told her that the night before he heard the news, he had a dream in which his friend came to see him, saying he was getting married again and introduced a woman with very long hair, almost reaching the ground. As soon as her husband finished telling the story, the image of the long-haired woman Kayla had seen that night flashed in her mind. For some reason, Kayla didn't share her experience with her husband, and for many years, she kept wondering if what she had seen was real, because she had never encountered anything like that before. In the year 2022, out of the blue one day, her husband told her that he had gotten to know a friend who was a government official. This friend shared with him the history of the said house, explaining that he had once been relocated to live there. Strange incidents occurred frequently within the house, to the point where his partner lost their sanity. He mentioned that he had the chance to ask the locals about it, and they recounted from person to person that originally, the house belonged to a high-ranking government official who lived there with his wife. The couple never had children, so they took in a niece from a relative and raised her as their own, providing her with a good education. However, as the niece grew older, she seemed to lose interest in her studies, became rebellious, and eventually dropped out of school. The locals said that there was a period when they often heard the sounds of arguments coming from inside the house. Then one day, it was heard that the government official's wife had fallen down the stairs and broken her neck, dying on the landing. After his wife's death, the official seemed to become especially possessive of his niece. But not long after, he fell ill and ended up bedridden for many days, suffering in a manner akin to having good days and bad days. Until one day, the villagers in the area heard the sound of people arguing from inside the house again. This time, it was more intense than before, with loud shouting and cursing. The argument seemed to revolve around the discovery that the niece had brought a man to sleep in the house. Then, there was a woman's scream that rang out loudly before everything fell silent. After that incident, no one in the village saw the niece again. There was much speculation that the official had sent her back to the countryside. The house remained closed up as if no one lived there until someone heard the sound of chains from inside. Rumors spread that the official might have locked the niece inside the house. One morning, villagers gathered around the front fence of the house, looking at something. It turned out that the niece's body was found hanging from a tree in the front yard. When authorities investigated the scene, they found the body of the niece's boyfriend, sitting with a blue face and head bowed, on a chair in the main hall. Upstairs, they discovered the official's body, eyes bulging, with bruises around his neck. His legs were chained to a pillar, and it appeared that his tongue had been cut out. His ankles were severely bruised and infected from being shackled for a long time. After Kayla heard the entire story, she could piece together the horrific events she had experienced that night. It was the first time in her life that she realized such things could truly happen. Additionally, her husband learned from his friend that the government official's house still stands and has not been demolished. It was renovated and a religious ceremony was held, but it remains vacant to this day, with no officials willing to stay there.